missing a few people, but hopefully everyone will start to trickle in. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the TPB's work session on climate change mitigation. Thank you for your participation and for the additional time you're giving to the TPB for yet, good morning, a second month in a row so we can continue our deliberations on this important topic. My expectations for the work session today are for us as a group to agree on a recommendation we can make to the full board later today on the matter of mitigating climate change impacts within the transportation sector. As many of those on the board have noted, we believe that our efforts to address the impacts of climate change will have to be ongoing. So I see the actions we take now as something that we will build on as we learn more and as we situate ourselves better to take additional actions. I know we have quite a bit to discuss, and I will try my best to allow all of us to come up with a set of actions for recommendations to the full board later today. To use our time efficiently while also making sure that each of us participating today has an opportunity to present their view and the views of their jurisdiction, here is what I plan to do. I will have each of us work with an allocated time. We will start with 2 minutes. Doesn't mean you have to take the whole entire 2 minutes, just at whatever time you need to express up to 2 minutes your concerns for that from your jurisdiction. There will not be you know, part-time now, part-time there kind of thing. If there's time left, though, I will come back for follow-ups, but want to make sure that everyone in every jurisdiction gets an opportunity to share their thoughts on these matters. For each agenda item, I will have Conti provide an overview of the matter and outline the desired outcome of our discussions. Then I will call on each participating member to share their views for the 2 minutes, and then we will take stock of what the general sense of the group is. During the main meeting today, we will have only 25 minutes to both present the outcome of this work session and decide as a board on what our next steps will be. So there will be a second opportunity to weigh in on this topic, so that time will be more limited. Since we have some members participating virtually and some in person, Lynn, please recognize the board members or alternates who are participating today.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to read the folks around the room, and then I will read the names of the folks that are participating virtually. So, all right, we have Takis Karatonis, we have Peter Kovar, Earl Lewis, Ruben Collins, Ann Wheeler, John Lynch, and David Snyder in the room. Participating virtually, we have, and I'm just going to read the name of the members and alternates. Let's see, we have Allison Davis, Chris Conklin, Christina Henderson, Dan Maliff, Heather Edelman, Jason Gross, Kelly Russell, Mayor Rochelle, Neil Harris, Regina Moore from VDOT, Rodney Roberts, Stephen Geyer, and that is who we have logged in right now. I do know that there were some Metro delays, and I've seen a couple people that are have been delayed to arrive.
Great, thank you so much. Like I said, I think that hopefully we're going to see, we were expecting some more people here in person, so after those delays, hopefully we'll see more people start to come in. So Lynn, I'm sure you'll keep track of them as they do. Thank you, Lynn. Conti, would you please provide an overview of the work session agenda and the topics that we will be discussing this morning?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start with a quick overview of the materials members have for their reference. All of these documents are on the TPB meeting page on the internet. First, you should have a memo from me that is dated May 12th that provides detailed information on the 3 topics that we will be discussing, which also includes details on the options for 2 of the 3 topics we'll be discussing. Attached to this memo from me is a draft supplemental report from TPB's consultants, ICF, that provides some new additional information on analysis that was done after the last month's TPB work session based on the comments we received. These are related to the options, and I will be referring to those during my briefing later. Members also have a copy of the staff memo that is dated April 14th. This is the same memo you received for your April work session, and this has the results of the TPB members survey. One last item you should have in your read-ahead packet is a staff memo that is dated April 27th. This memo summarizes the desk research that staff undertook, again after the last work session, looking at what some of the other comparable MPOs in the country have done with regards to adopting greenhouse gas reduction goals just for the transportation sector. So that's an overview of the materials you have, Kim. I'll now try to set the stage for today's discussion. I'll start with a brief recap of where we are with the discussions on this topic of climate change mitigation and what the desired next steps would be. The TPB completed a year-long study explicitly looking at greenhouse gas emissions within the transportation sector. This study evaluated about 14 different strategies by combining them in different ways into 10 scenarios. The analysis estimated the potential greenhouse gas reductions within the transportation sector after accounting for the emissions from the electricity sector that the region could anticipate if all of the strategies within any of these 10 scenarios were implemented. Results of this analysis was presented to the TPB in December. There were discussions about it in January as well. So in today's work session, which is the second work session on this topic, the TPB undertook a survey of each of its members to find out the level of support among the 23 member jurisdictions, the 3 DOTs, and the Regional Transit Agency, WMATA, on 2 topics. Should the TPB adopt greenhouse gas reduction goals just for the transportation sector? And which of the greenhouse gas reduction strategies analyzed in the TPB study should the TPB adopt as planning priorities at this time? The survey indicated that there was majority support to adopt greenhouse gas reduction goals for the transportation sector, and a majority of the members indicated support to adopt a set of greenhouse gas reduction strategies that the TPB study analyzed. And also, a majority of the members noted some other strategies merited further discussion at the local, state, and regional levels before the TPB could consider adopting them as regional priorities. So today's work session is intended to develop recommendations for the TPB on the topic of greenhouse gas reduction goals for transportation sector and the strategies that the TPB would adopt at this time as planning priorities. Hopefully, Madam Chair, that provides the context for the next few agenda items. Also, my colleagues, Mark Moran and the lead staff from TPB's consultant team, Michael Grant, will be here and will be happy to assist with any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Conti, for that full brief, and thank you all for being here today. Let us get started with the first of the topics to recommend to the full board. Conti, I guess you just gave us the briefing. Would you please give us the topic for discussion, what it is, where we are, and what we are looking to get out of the discussion?
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. So, reflecting on the results of the TPB member survey and all the discussions to date, I suppose it would be accurate to say that there is general agreement among the TPB members that the TPB should consider adopting greenhouse gas reduction goals specifically for transportation sector. The survey and the previous discussions have, however, left open the question of at what level should these greenhouse gas reduction goals be set, particularly for 2030. The region has goals for all sectors combined for 2030 and 2050, and these are 50% reduction from the 2005 levels by 2030 and 80% reduction from 2005 levels by 2050. The TPB could consider adopting these same levels of reductions for the transportation sector. That is option 1. It should be noted that to date, there has not been any study that has been that identifies the various actions that could be taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions within the transportation sector by 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. which is 8 years from now. Members will recognize that decision-making takes time, especially if all 23 localities and the 3 states must take the same or substantively similar decisions. Even after decisions are made, developing and implementing projects and programs takes time, and the payoffs from such implemented projects and programs generally are built up over time and not always overnight. These are the issues with the 50% reduction goal for 2030. For 2050, however, there is more time for especially if there is a collective commitment to take some of these substantive actions. That said, option A of the same levels of goals for 2030 and 2050 is still the TPB's option. It is an aspirational goal, although without a clear pathway to achieving it at this time. Second, the TPB study did show that 3 of the 10 scenarios, if fully implemented, could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 32% below 2005 levels by 2030, and close to 80% by 2050. This is option B. I would note that the 3 of the 10 TPB scenarios, which said that we could achieve 32% reductions by 2030, all have different combinations of VMT reduction strategies and zero-emission vehicle strategies. However, not all of these strategies assumed in these 3 scenarios currently have been identified to be adopted as planning priorities. So with option B, a 32% reduction by 2030 is theoretically possible. Not all of the actions needed to produce that level currently could be adopted as planning priorities according to the TPB survey. So I would say option B is a data-driven goal, yet ambitious. Finally, the third option that the TPB has, in recognizing many of the members who have suggested that adopting a greenhouse gas reduction goal for 2030 should correspond to the strategies that the TPB would be adopting as planning priorities at this time. So since we did not know which strategies would be supported, we had not analyzed that. We were able to have the consultant conduct some additional analysis since the last meeting, and the consultant has now provided us with the estimates of how much greenhouse gas reductions we can anticipate by 2030 and 2050, strictly based on the 7 strategies that majority of the members say we can adopt at this time. That is option C. We are calling it a pragmatic, still data-driven, but based on the strategies that the members have indicated they could adopt at this time. So hopefully, Madam Chair, that sets the context for members' input. Staff would be happy to answer any questions as the discussions follow. Thanks.
Thank you, Kanti. It's a great summarization of where we're at. Before I begin soliciting the thoughts of those on the board by turn, are there any questions on the overview that Kanti just provided versus specific comments that you might like to provide to the whole board? In the room, I don't see any hands. Lynn, is there anybody online?
No hands.
Okay, great. So this is how we're going to do this morning. Lynn will please call on members to provide their views. Remember, you have only a total of 2 minutes to express those views from your jurisdiction. Lynn, I will let you go ahead and start calling on members.
Yep, so we'll just start with folks in the room. Perfect. So we'll just go from just around the dais. So Takis, would you like to go first?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So first of all, thank you for all the work that has been done here. We have to repeat that this is a lot of the work that stands behind this conversation we have today, and I believe there is more work ahead. So going through the 3 options here, Option number one is, of course, the option I would like, and I believe a lot of people would like to see succeed here. The problem is it's unpractical, and we are talking about governing and about trying to turn a very, very big ship around. Option C is kind of good business as usual. So is where, Madam Chair, where we get by not pushing, a lot. It's practically something that I am afraid it's mostly comfortable to adapt to. Option B has an element that would push us to be a little bit more aggressive and more targeted. And if we measure correctly, I think that this is a goal that seems to me appropriate to set. Make no mistake, though, saying 32% until 2030, which is basically almost tomorrow, leaves us a lot to work on to attain the 80% in 2050, which is actually the day after tomorrow. So we cannot proceed with a goal just with a numeric goal. We have to also put the seeds of the policies that will make the next step attainable after that. And for me, this is really critical. So I gravitate towards option B, and I hope I have exhausted my 2 minutes. So.
Thank you.
Next, Mr. Kovar.
I'm Peter Kovar. I'm the alternate. I think a lot of you know Casey Kozik from Tacoma Park, and she's unavailable today, so I'm filling in. And I appreciate the comments of my colleague. In Tacoma Park, we do see the top option, the 50%, as the ideal that we should be striving for, recognizing that that's aspirational. I think what would make sense is to explain to the greater community that 50% would be the ideal, because I see what we're doing is as much a signal to residents of the area as it is a kind of nuts and bolts bureaucratic thing of what can we do to advance the ball down the field. And so I'd like to show folks that in the ideal world, we'd seek 50%. 32 is the minimum that we ought to try to go for. And even if you pick these numbers, 32% and 29%, obviously the staff have done a great job with this, but getting every jurisdiction in the area to do all these things, if we say we're doing 32, we'll do less than 32. If we say we're doing 29, we'll do less than 29. That's just the way the world is going to work, and people continue moving here and so on. So for me, and speaking on behalf of Casey and the city, I don't want to just have that 50% sort of disappear. So to me, the message that we send to the people should be, here's the ideal. We've identified actions that can get us to this. We're going to push as hard as we can. Potentially we can go above that over time. But my concern is that if the people in the area don't understand the gravity of the situation, it could just be a business as usual, as my MWAC colleague over has also said. So that's what my preference would be. Thanks.
Mr. Earl Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be back here in person. As most of the people here know, Maryland has had pretty ambitious climate change goals for a number of years, and those continue to get more ambitious. At the same time, it's very important that in order to be able to work effectively with all the stakeholders involved, which involve government, private sector, and non-governmental organizations, it's also important that they should be data-driven. So I'm supportive of option B, which is ambitious, data-driven, will definitely be perceived as moving the ball forward. And as we measure our progress, and again, we've made quite a bit of progress since 2006, which is the year that Maryland uses as their baseline, we'll be able to continue to make more progress and bring everyone along with us with ambitious data-driven goals that are stretched but achievable, and that don't give people a disincentive because they think the goals are unrealistic. So I think the middle path here makes sense to move forward with. That, I'll get back to balance my time.
We'll let the chair finish up. So we're going to skip you, go to Mr. Collins.
Good morning, everyone. Like many of the jurisdictions that are a part of the TPB, Charles County does not actually have rail and options other than having each individual coming from our community actually driving and commuting. And so I think part of the challenge for smaller jurisdictions that are not directly in the metropolitan area or core, this needs to be a process of education and to continue to value the importance of what these goals are. My initial thought would be option C is the most practical within our community because this really does require a level of education to get all of our citizens on par with recognizing how important these goals are. And we've attempted to do that through policy, and we've attempted to do that through our partnerships through COG to assist in providing the messaging that I think is necessary as we move forward. So I'm just being more practical in terms of what is feasible where our community is right now. I'd certainly appreciate the goals, but I think from a practical sense, where we are and the fact that we simply don't have the options for transportation that the more urban jurisdictions have, it's going to be more of a challenge for us to move forward. But I really want to stress that our county is moving forward and establishing policy in anticipation that we will be able to reach these goals in the future.
Thank you.
Gary Ehrenrich.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gary Ehrenrich, Montgomery County, representing the county executive this morning. I want to first start out by saying that this is an incredibly important process and project, and that having a group of regional transportation policymakers is really important to come to some agreement and approach to move forward. But with that said, we all have many have different policy goals and strategies that go with those goals. Montgomery County may be an outlier here in the room with very stringent goals of being 100% by 2035. And that is really obviously much more stringent and strict than anything we've been talking about. The second level is the state, and Maryland just passed legislation. I'm surprised that Earl didn't talk about it. There are state code now. There is a state law that says 31% by 50%, whatever it is, 50% by 2031 and 100% by 2045. So Maryland jurisdictions kind of have some obligation to move in a more stringent and more aggressive. In terms of the county, actually we like combo number 4, which was the highest scoring and productive reductions. But in lieu of that not being discussed today, we would like to keep with the COG goals. I think it's really important, 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. We know there's stretch. We know that all jurisdictions can't meet it, but as a region, we think we can, and we have to move in that direction. Thank you.
Ms. Ann Wheeler.
I want to start by thanking for the analysis and the additional analysis. And the COG goals of 50%, we have sort of stood by those, but that's a myriad of different things, not just transportation, and I think it's important to understand that. And as I will talk about Mr. Collins' remarks of that, we are not an urban jurisdiction and we don't have the access to rail. And not to beat a dead horse, we are very car-centric in Prince William County. I believe that going forward there are going to need to be different strategies in different jurisdictions in a way to reduce greenhouse gases for the transportation sector. In one, it might be vehicle miles traveled. In some place like Prince William County, it might be the electrification of the fleet. And I will point out that from my understanding is that even the pragmatic reduction goal is still significantly higher than peer MPOs across the country. And those include some very progressive MPOs. And so I think it's important to notice that also. I'm a pragmatist. I would rather have a goal that is attainable. That's just how I think it's better to plan to go forward. And so, you know, I lean toward, and we lean toward the pragmatic 29% reduction by 2030 and an 8% reduction by 2050. That said, I think it's important to realize that we have these goals for TPB, put them in place, and perhaps have different ways of achieving that for different jurisdictions, and just recognizing that. Because I think that's where some of the discourse comes from. But I do believe that these are important goals, both at TPB and as well as at COG. And we, of course, have those in place, trying to address those even with our own, for instance, energy usage in Prince William County. So thank you.
Mr. Victor Angry.
Thank you. Okay, so I won't belabor what was just said here. As you know, Prince William County, we're here. But I do want to echo what Mr. Collins and Chair Wheeler have said, and to not hold that conversation up any longer. I'll move it on along. All right, thanks.
Mr. John Lynch.
Good morning, John Lynch, Virginia Department of Transportation. I think in terms of the options that are laid out, first I do want to thank the TPB staff for all the hard work in getting us great information to make a sound decision. But regardless of the option that's implemented, obviously Virginia will collaborate and concentrate on helping the climate through our transportation programs. But regardless of the implementation, we believe the adoption of the CHG goals should be aspirational and not directly tied to the Visualized 2045 plan, as it's not required by federal law, and that's really the process that we're following. As alluded to by Chair Wheeler, the TPB survey and, you know, of other MPOs didn't find any peer MPOs that provided voluntarily adopted on-road transportation greenhouse gases. Two states, California and Oregon, were legislated to adopt those goals, but they're significantly lower than what we're proposing here. California was 19% and Oregon 20%, and that was all both based on per capita numbers. And then Colorado has an absolute reduction of 2 to 7%. But in any case, I think based on the options provided, that the pragmatic goals on option C seem to be reasonable. But again, you know, we'll work to make sure we get a collaborative solution here. Thank you.
David Snyder.
Good morning, and thanks to everyone involved in the process. We're in the process now of setting goals, and I believe those goals have already been set. The United States is a participant in the Paris Climate Change Accord. That has set a goal of less than 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius. The President of the United States has declared our goal to be 100% carbon neutral by 2050 and 50 to 52% by 2030. The COG board has set a goal of 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. I believe we are not in a position to change those goals, and so I don't support any goal other than the goals that have been established by the President of the United States and the COG board until those goals are in some other way changed. So that's my basic position. It would lead me to the most ambitious of all of them, and I don't accept necessarily the way that those goals have been defined. So in sum, I believe we need, and we are under an obligation to carry out and to reiterate the goals established for us by our governing bodies, the President of the United States and the COG board. I believe we cannot and should not establish any other goals. Now, how and when we achieve them, the issues involved, that's clearly something that we will and should discuss later on. Thank you.
Thanks. So we had one more person join us in the room. So Brian, if you'd like to take 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I so apologize, but I was running from another meeting trying to get here. Calamity of incidents happen, but I'm here. So I've studied this incident not just from my current position, but also from the position of being, as you all know, in public safety for quite a long time. I agree with a lot of assessments in the room, but here's what I want to drop on the table. The reality is that having lofty goals and not being able to incrementally get there in a factual, timely manner needs to be taken in consideration. So let's talk about the budgets of everybody and every community in this room. So I think the staff did a yeoman's job of trying to get us to where we could sort of split the middle of pragmatic, realistic, but also attainable at some point. David, I don't begrudge where we are with the president and with everyone else, but them setting lofty goals for these jurisdictions and us not having the funding to get there is not worth the paper it's printed on. That's the reality of where we are. So I think for this room, for this region, because we have definitely a lot of urban and some urban/rural, I believe that the work that the staff done to get us down to where they listen to us is quite vitally important. Realistic, a stretch, for sure. I'm in that particular jurisdiction myself. But I do think that if we push for that, we can all at least be on a better page where we'll probably meet it. Anything loftier is not realistic. So what will happen? This board, 30 years from now, will be sitting here at 1/3 of what we're trying to attain, if that at the most. I think what we're doing today, and if we can get through what's been laid before us and agreed upon, I think we'll get there. So I'm for that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Kitty, which goal did he see?
It's C, yes. Yes.
Thank you.
So that completes the group in the room. So what I'm going to do now is read names from our list. However, I do notice there's a lot of members and alternates that are here, so I'm going to skip over the people if their member is here. And then at the end, I'll ask Ms. Sebesky to open it up to anyone that I may have missed.
Thank you.
All right, so Adam Shellenberger.
Hello. Hello.
If we can hear you, but if you speak a little bit louder, that would be most helpful.
I apologize. This is Rodney Roberts. I'm trying to get in line to speak, but I can't find a raise hand button on this thing. I don't know where it is.
Mr. Roberts, I'm calling out names of members, and you will be called because you're an R. So I was going to get to you when I got down the alphabetical order list, if that's okay.
I just want to make sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No problem. First up, Adam Shellenberger. I'm just going to go through this, so if we can come back. The next up.
Lynn, could you also give the jurisdiction when you're calling people by names, just so that I can keep track?
Sure, and I may get it wrong. So when you do speak, if you announce your jurisdiction as well, because it doesn't list it on here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So Adam's actually from Fauquier County. So anyway, I'll just move on. So Allison Davis from WMATA.
Hi, thanks, Lynn. Allison Davis from WMATA. And I really appreciate all the work that TPB staff and leadership have done to move this forward. And so I will say I'm not going to belabor and take my whole 2 minutes, but I think really we need to be aggressive on where we're going, right? If we the people who have been put together to, move this region forward aren't being aggressive, then those who are following us are also not going to be aggressive. So to me, I think having that goal that that goes beyond what we can do just by accepting half of the strategies. I think so. For me, I will just summarize and say that I think recommendation B, the 32% by 2030 is, I think, it's a stretch goal, but I think we can get there, and I think that's leading where I think we need to be going. And some jurisdictions may beat that, and I think that's fantastic. So just putting that out there. Thank you.
Next up, I'm going to call in Bridget Newton from Rockville.
Thanks, Lynn, and thank you for the extra help to get me on this morning. The city of Rockville is having a few technical issues, I guess, because I'm not the only one who is having trouble getting in. I'm going to go for A, and a fallback would be B, but I think we need to be bold. I've said this before in TPB. This is the time that we need to stretch. And I appreciate all the effort that everyone has made, but for the city of Rockville, we're going to go with A. Thank you.
Christina Henderson, DC Council.
Thanks, Lynn, and thanks to all the work of the staff. So DC, obviously fairly uniquely positioned, has a goal that matches option A, and sort of echoing a little bit of what even Bridget said, and some of the other. I feel like we have to go bold here, and so I think ours would be an option A as well. Option B being secondary on that front. But thank you.
Next up, I'm going to call in Kelly Russell, City of Frederick.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. The City of Frederick, currently our goals are largely aligned with option C. And while we think that's the most reasonable goal present, we recognize that jurisdictions can't or won't move forward uniformly. So while option B is attractive as a way of setting the bar high, we also feel that in order to support more aggressive goals, we really need to see some significant funding and other resources made available to us. Otherwise, it's just sort of numbers on the page. Also, just a thought that was thrown out there is we wonder if rather than setting overall emissions targets, we could instead create an emissions budget for the next 28 years. That is, as though we adopted option A, which would encourage fast movement, but without tying us to an impossible 2030 goal, which is something that was thrown out there I wanted to share. But we'd like to see B, but we need some help getting there.
Thank you. Next up, I have Mark Rawlings from DDOT. I understand he's also with Leslie and some others.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Lynn. And thank you to the TPB for all of your hard work on this. This is Leslie Rupert, the alternative for DDOT. And so the District of Columbia works to implement...
Leslie, can you speak up or more into the microphone, please?
I'm going to move. Sorry about that. We're in a shared conference room together. This is Leslie Rupert with DDOT, the alternative for DDOT. And thank you for all of TPB's hard work on this issue. The District of Columbia works really hard to implement transportation and energy projects and programs that reduce greenhouse gases. And we're really glad about this opportunity to work together regionally. And as everybody knows, hopefully that DDOT recently updated its long-range multimodal plan, Move DC, which aligns with other district plans such as Sustainable DC and Clean Energy DC, that sets the goal to reduce greenhouse gas by 50% by 2032. And we're also really looking forward to aligning with the programs and requirements that are coming out of USDOT to work on electrification implementation plans, as well as carbon reduction strategies. So all that to say that DDOT aligns best with option A. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Mayor Jeanette Rochelle from Manassas Park.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeanette Rochelle, Manassas Park. I also want to thank staff for all the work that's been done on this. Our jurisdiction would support a more pragmatic approach. We are also a jurisdiction without access to transit, just as Prince William. When looking at the staff recommended strategies, they appear to be very meaningful beginning, and they're very logical goals, but we have to remember they are just that, they're goals, and I think that goals should be achievable. I also urge pragmatism because there may be challenges regarding funding, regarding existing policy, and regarding the deployment of technology. So thank you again, Madam Chair.
Next up, Neil Harris from Gaithersburg.
All right, thank you. So while we're in a similar position to some of the other jurisdictions in that we do not have our own transit, agree that setting aggressive goals in order to get our climate and our planet where it needs to be is vitally important. Looking at the big picture, not just transportation, but the three things that need to be done in our region are reducing greenhouse gases from the energy production sector, from the building sector, and from transportation. Since we're the Transportation Planning Board, focusing on that, looking at the report and the data from the consultants, the clear win here that overwhelmingly dwarfs any other project is the electrification of the fleet, or at least moving to zero emissions, whether it's electric or some other technology platform. Everything else, VMT and working closer to living closer to work or telework, are very marginal improvements on air quality where electrification is really the key. So our position would be, as a city, to choose option C, which is the pragmatic approach, but we would certainly lean heavily into whatever it takes to move to the most aggressive levels possible, and focus on the electrification of the fleet as by far the most important piece of the puzzle. Everything else, honestly, all the other projects that we've looked at are within the margin for error in the data that we have. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up, Rodney Roberts from the city of Greenbelt.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're in favor. Obviously, I think our city would be in favor of the strongest approach that we can take. But I think we need to get beyond this, A, B, C, D thing and talk about reality. And I agree with someone else who spoke that said all these plans and things are on paper are really worth the paper they're printed on. So we need to talk about the reality. The reality right now is here in the state of Maryland, we have a governor's plan that is really suicide, talking about widening all the highways, the Beltway, 270, all these highways have to be widened, and we just continue to do the same thing that we're doing now. So unless we stop that plan and say, no, we're not widening any more highways, we're not going to have more automobiles, and start planning for a future with a lot less automobiles, we're not going to meet any goal. That's my fear. And I think that's the reality, because, even if you electrify the fleet, that fleet uses a lot of energy and carbon output just to build. So that is not going to save our planet. We need to look at the reality, and we need to cut our use of automobiles and the way we're doing business right now. And it starts with stopping these crazy 1950 thoughts of plans of just widening our highways and having more cars. Oh yes, but we'll electrify them. That's not going to save us. We gotta get out of our cars, and we gotta provide the infrastructure for all these counties that are outside of the city center to be able to have public transportation. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts, would you?
Mr. Roberts, could you tell us which of the three your jurisdiction would support, and do it briefly since we're over time?
No, because I think we're starting this from the wrong angle. I think we need to look at specific things that we're going to do to stop what's going on.
Go ahead, Lynn, and move on to the next person, please. Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you.
Great. The next person is Victor Weisberg from Prince George's County.
Good morning. Hi, Victor.
Victor, we can't hear you. You might have accidentally gone on mute. Lynn, you want to come back?
So it's showing green. So that's the... Oh, Vic, you're back, but we just missed everything you had just said.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, and I apologize. My connection is not very good. Business as usual, I think, is, the sort of the time has passed where that is truly a viable option.
we lost him again. That concludes what I'm guessing are, I'm trying to navigate between who members, alternates, and just support staff. So I would suggest either opening it up or,
Can you ask Vic
We
to
need to do
text
more. We need to look
his
at
answer?
how we can better, balance the region. That is a sure, a surefire strategy for how we can, achieve greater equity and sustainability. And so, I think to the extent we can,
Okay, we'll reach out to Victor to get his text. I think, Madam Chair, as chair, you were going last, so if you could hear from City of Manassas.
So I want to start by saying that
what would it take
the reason the
scenario
survey was
study
asked to be
on the issue of moving jobs closer to where there's existing housing. Thank you.
Okay, so if you can let me know what his vote was, since we couldn't hear a lot of what he said, that would be helpful.
Okay.
And thank you all for this very meaningful input. The reason the survey was asked to be conducted with all of your elected body and with staff was because not any one of us can make any of this meaningful change. The change is going to require votes in every jurisdiction to make these initiatives go forward. So I hope that the votes that were cast today reflect your elected bodies and their willingness to do the initiatives you're talking about. If you're asking for initiative A, I'm assuming that you're a full elected body is agreeing to invest the majority of their public funding into this one item. Manassas, however, cannot. We are also going to go with option C because we don't have access to rail. In order for people to get jobs and go to jobs that live in our jurisdiction, they do have to travel on roads to get there. So as Mr. Collins said, education in these areas is going to be important to help these people understand why and the benefits of electrified vehicles. Getting those jurisdictions to turn their fleets over to electric are all going to be meaningful input. As we all go into the meeting later today, and we will be talking about this more, I hope everyone will consider the fact that if we are not working inclusive of all three jurisdictions, it's really great that Maryland has great aspirations. These are minimal standards we're talking about that we believe across the board everyone will be able to do so that we can make true meaningful impact versus no impact. If we have jurisdictions, and I will tell you my straw poll shows that everyone that is in the outer suburbs that do not have access to Metro and bus service for all of their citizens are the ones saying that they can't do A and B, that even doing C is going to be difficult to achieve. And we want to be there, and we want to include everybody so that we have meaningful change happen. So I want everyone to think about that as we go forward, that I don't believe anybody here or any jurisdiction does not believe that climate change is important and that everyone wants to do everything that they can. And we want everyone coming to the table and everyone making change so that we can go forward versus just saying it has to be this high or you're not doing anything meaningful. So with that, Conti.
Madam Chair, we had one other member join us, Kristen Umstad from Loudoun County. So if you could take 2 more minutes.
Absolutely.
Now we're running a little bit behind schedule, but.
That's okay. We need to hear the input. So please go ahead, Ms. Umstad.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I caught your last remarks, and on behalf of Loudoun County, I would agree. We don't have as extensive a network of transit as we are moving towards, but in order to get people to buses and Metro, we need the roads to do it. Furthermore,
on our Route 15 North corridor from Leesburg up to Point of Rocks, Maryland. We are looking at working with Maryland to get a commuter bus line going. But in order to do that, we're going to need to widen Route 15 because it's one lane in each direction. So we are entirely supportive. We are energizing our climate change approach and adding new features almost by the month. But we're not going to be able to get there at all if we cannot put people on roads to get them to transit. Thank you.
So which of the three aspirational, ambitious, which number, were you at C as well?
I would go with C, which we would find ambitious but manageable.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, we are running behind, Conti. So I guess, would you please review the next topic for discussion, what it is, where we are, and what we're looking to get out of this discussion so that we can move this along this morning?
Okay.
Madam Chair, a question. What will be reported to the TPB? An individual jurisdictional breakdown of the discussion we just had on goals?
No.
I would ask that that be the case.
We can provide that as well.
Record carried forward?
Yep.
Absolutely, as to how each jurisdiction came out.
Absolutely. We can do that. In terms of the timing for the main agenda during the board meeting, the thought was to indicate what the current sense of this group was during the work session. What A, B, and C, what options are there. The TPB will have to take a vote on it next month as to which of these they would like to go. But in terms of providing meeting minutes, the choices by jurisdiction, if that is the sense of the board, that certainly we have the information, we can make it available.
Thank you. That's my specific request.
Sure.
And that my comments be recorded that I am supporting goals set by the president and by the COG board.
Sure.
Thank you.
We'll do that. Thanks. So that was second item. We are a little bit behind. The second topic that the board, that's up for the board to discuss, the previous, hold on a second. Okay, so there are 7 strategies that the majority of the board members have indicated. These are all strategies that majority of the members can adopt as planning priorities, which means they would be able to begin working to reflect those priorities in the transportation decisions that they would be making right away. So there are 7 such strategies. However, there were some comments that in a few of those strategies, the level of outcomes assumed by the TPB study was very ambitious, particularly for 2030. So they supported the strategy, but they wanted to revisit whether we should adopt these strategies as planning priorities at these levels of outcomes. So the question then became, should the TPB adopt the 7 strategies as planning priorities at the level they were analyzed, or potentially at a slightly more modest level of implementation? Since we did not have the information of what the reductions could be if they are implemented at a more modest level, we had the consultant do some additional analysis within the last month, and which they have done. So what you see on the screen, for those 7 strategies that majority have already said we would adopt as planning priorities, if we adopt them at the level they were analyzed, which some members found was very aggressive for 2030, we would be able to anticipate 29% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030. And that is what is called combination 4. So these are the 7 strategies that has the majority support, and at the level they were analyzed, even though some of them appear to be very aggressive. Option 2 is those 7 strategies, with some of them implemented at a slightly modest level. That is combination 5. The region can anticipate about 23% reduction in greenhouse gases if these 7 strategies are implemented at the slightly modest level. So 29% by 2030 if implemented at the higher level, 23% by 2030 if implemented at the more modest level. So here's a quick review. I'm sorry the text is not big enough. You have this information and the slides are on the meeting webpage. These are the 7 strategies that members have said that could be adopted as planning priorities. The 4 strategies that members had asked us to consider implemented at a slightly modest level, 3 of the 4, the analysis found would make absolutely no difference in the amount of greenhouse gas reductions, whether it is implemented at the higher level or at the more modest level. So those are the very first one, improving walk and bike access, and the third one, implementing traffic system operational improvements to make our traffic flow on the roadways more efficient, and reducing travel time on all of the public transportation buses. Whether you implement it at the higher level or at the lower level, there would be no meaningful difference in the greenhouse gas reductions. The one strategy where there would be a significant difference in the amount of greenhouse gas reductions we can expect is tied with the zero emission vehicles or the fleet conversion. What was analyzed was that by 2030, in the next 8 years, 100% of all light duty vehicles sold in our region would be zero emission vehicles. 50% of all medium and heavy duty vehicles, including trucks, would be zero emission vehicles by 2030. And 100% of all buses operating on the roadways, not the new buses, even all the old buses operating, every one of them would be zero emission vehicles in the next 8 years. That is the level at which we assumed and we analyzed. That is, if we implement it at that level or if we adopt this strategy as a planning priority and work towards that, we can expect 29% reductions in greenhouse gases by 2030. Under a more modest level, the consultants analyzed what if only 50% of the new vehicles sold are zero emission vehicles? What if only 50% of the buses operating on the roadways in 2030 are zero emission vehicles? And that 50%, by the way, is the goal set by President Biden for the nation as well. So if you implement them at these more modest levels, you will get 23%. So those are the 2 options. So the question for members is, should the TPB adopt the 7 strategies as planning priorities at the level they were analyzed or at the slightly more modest level? Meaning option 1, which is the level they were analyzed, option 2, slightly reduced or a more modest level. Hopefully that sets the context for the input, Ms. Sebeski. Thanks.
Thank you. And because we are running short on time, if everyone is okay, what I'd like to do, Lynn, is have you call each person and just ask each person for their jurisdiction to state option 1 or option 2. If you have further questions or comments, especially those online, if you could put them in the chat, that way that information can all come back to us. Unless, Conti, you see something different, but we are already running about 25 minutes behind, so. Okay, if anyone has a problem with that, please let me know, but in order to try to get some feel so that we don't belabor conversations, it might be a good place at least to start. Thank you.
The easiest way to do that would be to run down the list.
One second, Gary, yes?
Yeah, question of clarification. You know, there are other options that have been presented in the staff reports, and we're limiting ourselves to combo 5 and 6.
So what I would say, because we're a matter of time, if you don't wish to vote for either one, just like Greenbelt did in the last one, then you can choose to not vote for either one. At this point, this is just what we're going to kind of see where people are at. If there's a lot of people who feel that way, then we'll have to go back to the drawing board and discuss it. Thank you.
Okay, great. The easiest way for me to do that is to just go down the list, because that way it'll be easier to capture everyone. So without further ado, District Council, anyone from the district? I think Christina Henderson is the only one participating right now. So Christina?
Thanks, Lynn. We're going to go with option 1.
Okay, great. District Department of Transportation?
Thanks, Lynn. This is option 1.
All right, anyone else from the District of Columbia that I missed?
This is Stephen
Maryland?
Garrett, Office of Planning's designee. Favor option 1. Thanks.
Gotcha. Okay, moving on to Maryland. City of Bowie. Charles County.
Option 1.
College Park.
Option 1.
Option 1. Frederick County. City of Frederick.
Option 1.
City of Gaithersburg. Option 2. City of Greenbelt.
Drawing board.
Did anyone hear that? Because I did not.
You said draw, I think.
Okay.
I said
City of
drawing.
Laurel.
I said drawing board. Drawing board. You need to go back to the drawing board. Because,
Gotcha, back to the drawing board. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Next. City of Laurel.
Option 2.
Montgomery County Executive.
Option 1.
Montgomery County Legislative. Prince George's County Executive. Vic, you can put it in the chat if you're unable to communicate. Prince George's County Legislative. City of Rockville.
Option 1.
Tacoma Park.
Option 1.
Maryland House of Delegates or Senate. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Option 2.
Moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria. Arlington County.
Option 1.
City of Fairfax. Fairfax County.
Option 1.
Falls Church.
Option 1 with the caveat that we need to work on different combinations, but offered that choice, we prefer option 1.
Thank you. Fauquier County.
Option 2.
Loudoun County. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Could you repeat that? I was talking.
Option 2, please.
Did you guys get that? 2. Got it. Okay. Loudoun County. Option 2. Manassas.
Option 1.
Manassas Park.
Option 2.
Prince William County.
Option 2.
Virginia House of Delegates or Senate. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Option 2 with the caveat that we would like to have some information on the dollars to convert to completely EV by 2013, as well as what the impact from the power sector would be in terms of greenhouse gas emissions if we were indeed to do that. Thank you.
And WMATA.
Option 1.
Lynn, we have a second member from Prince William County.
Prince William County. Well, okay. 2 from Prince William. We have 2 from Fairfax too, but we don't have everybody here. So
No,
would you?
they're both here.
Okay, both from
Mr. Angry.
option 2. Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
That concludes the master list of, generally speaking, voters.
At this point, Conti, I guess I'm going to turn it back to you. There were a few that obviously, even after the discussion, would like more review, but I don't know how much more review we have time to do either today or before June. So do you want to share some thoughts?
Yeah.
Where we should go from here?
I think a couple of comments as staff hears it is there seems to be clearly predominance of preference for option 1, which is at the much higher level, recognizing that a lot more needs to be understood of achieving those. There seems to be a clear commitment to strive to achieving those, but information such as what would be the cost, what are the greenhouse gas reduction implications from the energy sector, because it is a significant draw on the energy sector, as Mr. Roberts noted earlier. So what is their level of readiness? What is the infrastructure investment needed? For example, we know that for transit agencies, unlike for private vehicles, it is not simply purchasing a EV bus. It is completely upgrading their maintenance yards, their charging stations, training their mechanics, and having a bus that can operate for 10, 12 hours without needing a second vehicle to complete that day's route of service. So there are lots of issues to be understood. How would we be able to get there? And the board has in the past noted whatever it is we do on anything, whether it's on climate, congestion, we have to look at equity. So what does having 100% of the vehicles sold being EV by 2030 mean in terms of vehicle costs, vehicle affordability, both in terms of operations and in terms of purchase? So we appreciate these are some of the issues that in the literature have been noted as some of the topics. We certainly would be able to get additional assistance, technical assistance as needed as the board adopts and moves this forward to assist the board in terms of bringing in subject matter experts to discuss options of how to implement them, conducting additional data gathering and analysis to provide information for the implementation issues. So that's certainly something that is doable, Ms. Chair. I didn't want to forget, there's one other topic which members may appreciate. It's not necessarily on the time clock of 1 minute or 2 minutes for any one of you, but rather a reaffirmation, if we could, that there were 7 other strategies that were analyzed that did show that they also had potential to reduce greenhouse gases. But the majority of the members said, let us explore this further because there are substantive implementation issues about these 7 strategies that need to be discussed at a local level, at the state level, regional level, potentially at the national level as well. So these are the 7 strategies. I know you can't read all of them. I will just highlight a couple of them. So none of these are being discarded or set aside as not interested, but they're all being retained to be explored further in the coming years so that we can try and see how we can address them. So for example, one of the strategies here is making all public transportation in this region free. That would include Metro Rail, VRE, MARC, Metrobus, and all of the other 12 local bus services would be free. A second strategy would be imposing a commuter tax in this region. How would we do that? Do all the 23 members have the legislative authority to enact such a law? What will it be set? That's one of the strategies. It does have some potential to reduce greenhouse gases, but we don't fully understand how we would go about doing it. A third strategy, there would be a cardon fee to enter Washington, D.C., some parts of Washington, D.C. That is where potentially, is it up to the local jurisdictions? Is it up to the state? Would any federal action be necessary to do that? What will it be? How will it be collected? Those are some of the implementation issues associated with it. So these are the 7 strategies. I was just highlighting some of them. They all have potential to reduce greenhouse gases, but for the analysis, we were advised to not hold back on strategizing what are all the things we can do to address the impact of climate change as expeditiously as possible. So by design, the study did not look at the implementation issues, But also, TPB staff recognized that these discussions, the implementation topics, should not necessarily be limited to the TPB committees, but rather these are policy decisions, discussions that need to be had within individual jurisdictions, governing entities. So those were some of the reasons that were cited in this study, in this survey. So these 7 strategies are being set aside for further exploration on the implementation issues. So I just wanted to affirm that we are retaining these. We will find ways of how these discussions can be had. From a staff perspective, we can provide detailed write-up of the assumptions and the potential of greenhouse gas reductions to all of the member jurisdictions, the various agencies, and to the executives of the TPB members. And we can assist the localities with any data that they might need to have those discussions. And we would also be open to working with the Council of Governments and the various other committees they have to have a regional level coordinated discussion of these. So those were that was the last of the 3 items that we wanted to have some discussion so that we can report back to the TPB as to what they can consider adopting in June. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Conti. I mean, I think it is important, right? Any and all strategies that can be done in some jurisdictions, as said earlier, will be able to do more than others. But definitely, we don't want to do something that will have unintended consequences from an equity and inclusion standpoint, as well as just unknown consequences that have not been considered. And I think that's why those were predominantly marked that by most jurisdictions. But I guess I need some advice, sir, on whether or not we want to take another straw poll, or whether or not how do we want people to give this information to you today?
I think if generally there is a sense that, yes, let us continue to dig deeper into this and try to understand these issues, that is all as staff we would need to continue to plan how best we can assist the members on this board moving forward.
So I guess what might be best to do is, if anyone is in disagreement with leaving these for further exploration, some of them maybe even something that could be implemented or discussed, or not implemented, but further discussed and brought before this board even next year to be added to the plan even as early as next year. But we definitely need to have further exploration on these topics. If anyone disagrees with those 7 strategies, not following that course of action as previously discussed, I would like to have a nay now, or make a notation online so that we can see if there's, for some reason, a strong sense of going against this. Mr. Lewis?
Yes. I just want to go on record, similar to what David Snyder did earlier, that 5A is frankly impossible. 100% of all buses on the road by 2030. There's still lots of decisions to be made by transit agencies of whether battery electric or fuel cell buses are going to be the right technology choice. Because I've chaired Maryland's Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council for over 6 years. So we've looked at all these issues. We've discussed these issues at Maryland's Commission on Climate Change. I mean, MTA's goal is 50% of buses by 2030. That's going to be challenging. The amount of capital investment for battery electric bus recharging is almost a factor of 10 compared to light duty vehicles. The amount of capital involved is significant and would be virtually impossible, if not impossible, to do by 2030. General Motors, one of our larger domestic car manufacturers, is aggressive on zero-emission vehicles. They have a goal of 50% of their model lines by 2030 and 100% by 2035. And I won't even go into all the equity issues that are involved with this. But yes, please do a deep dive and get back to the group with more information regarding the practicality at all of option A for number 5.
So you don't wish to have these further explored for, or you do?
I do, but I would want to go on record with that. So please further explore it. you know, so that we want to have ambitious goals, but it doesn't help to send a signal to all the different stakeholders at the work in if you put up goals that are just frankly totally unrealistic based on current technology and the capital involved to get it done, even if we move aggressively, which we are.
Yeah, I believe that's what staff is saying. With further exploration, some of these may or may not be implementable. Go ahead, Mr. Alcorn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm okay with this, but I'm not sure 1 year for staff to come back is the right time period. What I might suggest would be that staff come back with a timetable, projections on which of these items, you know, might be done sooner rather than later. And you know, frankly, some of these might not take that long. Others might take a pretty long while. So I would just make that, see if that might be feasible.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's exactly, obviously I didn't explain it, but that's exactly what I'm saying, that these are not being tabled permanently, but we do recognize that some can be done more easily than others, and some will definitely require a lot more exploration.
Could we get a timetable from staff?
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah. One of the questions on climate change that inevitably comes up, and Conti and I talked about this briefly in a separate meeting, is the cost of not doing something. And so all these have their cost, but I think we should continue exploring them, but can the analysis, and in some cases this may be complicated, but can the analysis also include, to the extent it's doable, what's the cost if we don't do something? And so, for example, if you say it's going to cost billions of dollars to do X, but the likelihood is we'll have this many more severe storms that will cost way more than that all of our jurisdictions will have to contend with, even if we don't know exactly when that will occur. I think it would be helpful to have that type of understanding as part of the discussion. So I would urge that be made a part of the analysis to the extent it's doable.
Again, I think we would agree. We're at right now. I'm asking for comments if you don't wish to table these for further exploration, so the staff understands that these are going to be further explored, and in the coming years they will. And I agree with Mr. Alcorn that a timetable of when we think each of these things might, because some will require more time than others, could start to be discussed as a fair request. So if that's something that can be given out next month or at some time would be good.
We'll probably need a little bit of time, but we'll definitely identify. Each one of them have a different set of issues, so we can identify what are the issues.
Thank you. Did anyone else wish to talk about not supporting these goals? I mean,
the strategies.
The strategies to be tabled.
I want to talk about the strategies just real quick.
Okay.
Because specifically, they're on page 8, 1 through 7 is what I'm talking about in the staff memo. I just want to make certain that, you know, certain ones, inner jurisdictions, outer jurisdictions, make a difference once again. You know, if we're having people drive to our activity centers and they're right nearby, that's good for us because that way they're not commuting, right? And so for Prince William County. On the other hand, if you have lots of businesses nearby, I don't know why you would need to encourage telework if people can walk there. So just recognizing that, I think they're 1 through 7 on page 8 of the staff memo are great. Just recognizing the different impacts for different places would be wonderful too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr.
Yes, Madam Chair. Really just a clarification of what we're asking for here. Explore does not mean support or oppose. Is that my understanding? I think the record needs to be clear about that because there are some things on there that look good and some things that don't look good, but I'm willing to go along with what the region wants to explore, but that should not imply either opposition or support. And that should be very clear unless anyone suggests anything else. Thank you.
And I apologize if I've not been clear. What is that all we're saying today is that we agree these could be important, but they just need further exploration so that we do not consider something that has unintended consequences. They will each come back before this board over time to be considered to be added in as the information, the full analysis is given, so that we can all know exactly whether or not the strategy with the full potential for implementation is something that the members at that time would be wanting to consider. So that's all that I believe staff is looking for, is that everyone is comfortable with the fact that we recognize that these 7 strategies are important, and with some of the other feedback of things that we would like included in that analysis be included. So I think unless you heard something different from people online, Lynn, at least I feel from the people in the room, as I understand, Conti, is that everyone is comfortable with these continuing to be considered for further exploration with the additional things that have been brought forward here this morning.
Rodney Roberts has his hand up.
Okay. Mr. Roberts, do you wish to not have these further explored?
Absolutely.
That's what we're discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, at the same time, I think that everything that we can do can have unintended consequences. But yes, absolutely explore, you know, everything that you can. But, you know, keeping in mind that we only have so much time, and the Washington region is very low level as far as sea level goes. So the ocean is coming up, and we only have so much time to deal with it. So that's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Ms.
I guess with all of that, we can, well, yeah.
We're back on time.
Do we want, go ahead.
Just one thing, Mr. Kovar had suggested that, so just as we are into the last item, you know, just as from a staff perspective, a recap of what we have heard. On the first topic, should the TPB adopt greenhouse gas reduction goals for transportation sector? Yes. At what level should it be set? The preference appears to be either A or C, according to the numbers that we have of people who identified which one, either go aggressive or go pragmatic. So that's one we have heard. The second thing on the 7 strategies that the region TPB should consider adopting as planning priorities. They're all supported, all 7 are supported, and they're supported at the highest level of implementation assumed in this study. So those, and then the third, these 7 strategies that were analyzed would continue to be explored, getting a better understanding of what are the implementation issues, what might be the potential time frame for addressing and resolving those issues so that those can be adopted as well at some point in the future. Those are the 3 broad outlines that I get. Additionally, there are a couple other things that we were asked as staff. Number 1, to be prepared to assist the local jurisdictions and the board with the 7 strategies that they would be adopting in terms of understanding what are some of the costs for implementing some of those, and some greater level of detail in terms of actions and coordinations, whether it is the impact on electricity, grid, or what have you. The second point that was made for staff, and this was Mr. Kovar's point, that when we finalize this analysis and documentation, we need to acknowledge what is the cost of inaction, while recognizing that some of these strategies could require a significant financial investment. There is also a similar disinvestment that could happen if it is not done. That is, the cost of inaction is not something we have analyzed, but it has been talked about. It is something we could conceivably do with some assistance. So I want to take advantage in just a minute of having the subject matter expert from ICI, Michael Grant, who has been doing this work for other regions in the country, as to, before I commit staff that, yeah, we can do this, I want somebody who knows more about this than me to say, yeah, if you say yes, we can help you. Michael?
Well, thank you. I was just going to respond also on what Mr. Lewis said regarding the 7 strategies. When we developed the original scenarios, we developed very aggressive scenarios, and the electric vehicle strategy shows the most impact of all of the strategies. The analysis we conducted had an extremely aggressive assumption about 100% of vehicles being electric, vehicles sold being electric by 2030. There were many questions raised about whether that's technically feasible based on whether the manufacturers can produce those vehicles, whether those will be in the market at that point. So we analyzed another scenario that included the 50% goal, which is the ambitious goal that President Biden set. So I just did want to acknowledge that while we set a more modest assumption, that second assumption by many is considered very aggressive. And so I just wanted to make sure that was clear to the participants, because the initial analysis we conducted had some criticisms that it was unrealistic.
What about the cost of inaction? Is there methodologies that we can look into?
The cost of inaction can certainly be studied or looked at in terms of also the impacts of climate to the region in particular.
Thank you.
I'll let you ask one question real quick, but I do want to make sure that everyone gets to take a break.
Sure. Thank you very much. Gary Arnrich again. Everything that we've done has been good, and the process has been understandable, and trying to develop a consensus. One thing that needs to be pointed out, that everything we've been talking about are regional in nature. These are regional sorts of issues and policies, but implementation most likely is at a jurisdiction by jurisdiction level. So we need to maybe think about how, given these regional perspective, how we work individually as jurisdictions to attain and work towards those goals. And so I think there's a step there we need to work on how it all kind of fits together. We all have different goals. Perhaps we can talk about priorities. And the electric vehicle would be a good example, a good first step for all the jurisdictions to purchase vehicles themselves that are EV and have that infrastructure in place. This is just as an example. Thank you.
And thank you. I think that will end, as we know, TPB has no authority over local jurisdictions, and has been discussed. Financially, these things may or may not be obtainable based on state and federal budgets that come to our localities. So I'm going to thank you all for your participation and input. I think we've had some really good conversation here today. If you have further questions for the consultants or Conti, please do that with this brief break that we're going to take. I'm going to conclude this work session, and we will have a report out of our discussion to the full board when we reconvene in about 15 minutes. So for those participating virtually, feel free to turn off your camera, go on mute. And for those of us in the room, I believe lunch is here. And again, really do appreciate the great discussion we've had today and last month on these. I know that you've taken a lot of time out of your busy schedules. It is very much appreciated. With that, I'll conclude this and adjourn the work session and see everyone in about 15 minutes. I know I need myself to have.
Meeting you.
So much good to be in person. And, I need to cut people off.
Good to see you, sir. How are you? Don't mind. Good seeing you. Never done. Yes. Option B is a blessing. I can find that. I mean, that would be challenging. But option A is like possible.
I think we said everybody that's studied in that jurisdictions like ours, they're just going to say, we're not even going to buy the coffee.
Put out something because there will be so much back putting out routine.
Maryland has said something, but we don't have that in the